July 1924. A small cabin near Mount Saint Helens in Washington. 5 miners. A siege that lasted all night. Boulders thrown. Gunfire. And then, 89 years later in 2013, a researcher named Mark Meyersel found the cabin's foundation. The square nails were still driven into the wood. Inside the perimeter, scattered among the rotting debris, were spent rifle cartridges, exactly matching the caliber the miners had fired that night. Real evidence, real location, real story. This is what happened. Andrew here. For Permanent Underclass, where we explore the weird stuff your therapist would tell you to avoid. The oh cool, now I'll never sleep again side of reality. If you're easily scared, easily offended, or easily anything, you're in the wrong place. After the Ohio Bigfoot flap, a lot of you had the same reaction. That's wild. But Ohio? You want to talk about Ohio? The real action is in the Pacific Northwest, and honestly, you were right. Because what's been documented in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia over the last 100 years makes Ohio look like a quiet weekend. So today we're opening 5 occurrences, 5 from the Pacific Northwest, that have never been adequately explained. These aren't blurry photos, these aren't campfire stories, these are incidents with physical evidence, multiple witnesses, and in one case, a response from federal authorities that raises more questions than it answers. Let's begin. Part 1. By mid-July, the gold was running out. Beck knew it. The traces they'd found in June had dwindled to nothing. The claim that was supposed to change everything was starting to look like a gamble that hadn't paid off. He was 30 years old. He'd invested time, money, hope into this canyon, and it was slipping away. The 5 miners, Fred Beck, his brother Roy, Marion Smith, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson, weren't drifters. They weren't desperate men with nothing to lose. Beck had staked claims in the region before. He knew the terrain. He knew the risks. They were there because they genuinely believed there was gold in those canyons. Real gold. Enough to change their lives. This much is documented. The miners' names are real. The location is real. A gorge on the southeast shoulder of Mount Saint Helens, now called Ape Canyon, which you can hike to today. The claim they were working was called the Vander White Mine. These aren't invented details. They're in the historical record. The summer had been good. They'd found traces. Enough to keep them working, keep them hopeful. This was a real operation, not a fantasy. By July, they were deep into the season, deeper into the mountains than most sane men would venture. But miners aren't always sane. They're driven. They see a glimmer of something, and they follow it into the dark. That's what brought Fred Beck to the edge of Ape Canyon on that particular afternoon in July. By mid-afternoon, Beck left the cabin alone. The other men didn't know where he was going, or if they did, they didn't ask. He was searching, desperate maybe. One last sweep of the canyon before they had to admit defeat and walk away. That's when he saw it. Near the edge of Ape Canyon, roughly 80 yards distant, standing upright. 7 feet tall, ape-like, but not quite like anything he'd ever seen before. The hair was matted, darker in some places, almost like old blood had dried into the fur. Its face was wrong somehow. The proportions were off, too wide, too angular, and it was watching him. Not curious, not defensive, watching, like it had been waiting. For a moment, Beck didn't move. Then something shifted in him. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the knowledge that if he didn't act, if he didn't do something, this canyon would take nothing from him but wasted time. He raised his rifle. 3 shots. The reports echoed across the gorge. The creature didn't run. It didn't scream. It simply toppled backward, 400 feet down into the gorge below. Beck stood there in the fading light, rifle in hand, breathing hard. Whatever he'd just killed, it was dead. The gold was still lost. But at least now he had a story. He walked back to the cabin as darkness crept in. And he told the men what he'd seen. The other miners didn't believe him. Not really. A 7-foot ape man? In Washington? It sounded like a fever dream. like desperation talking. They exchanged glances. Beck was a solid man, reliable, but this was too much. Skeptics stayed quiet, but as the sun dipped below the tree line and the temperature dropped, skepticism stopped mattering, because that's when the sound started. Darkness fell completely. The cabin had no electricity, no modern comfort, just wood walls, a roof, and 5 men. And silence. That was the worst part at first. The silence. After Beck's story, after the skepticism and the denial, they waited in absolute quiet as the light drained from the canyon. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just 5 men listening to their own breathing, waiting for something they couldn't see. Then the first boulder hit. It came out of nowhere, a crash against the western wall that shook the entire structure. Then another, and another. The impacts came faster now, rhythmic, relentless. Boulders the size of a man's head, hurled with force that shouldn't have been possible. The miners grabbed their rifles with shaking hands. They fired through the windows into the blackness, but there was nothing to aim at. Just darkness and the sound of more rocks coming. How many were out there? 10? 20? The men couldn't tell. Every shadow could be another one. Every sound could be the moment it all came crashing through. Hours passed. All night. The bombardment never stopped. The cabin shook. The walls creaked. Some of the men thought they could hear voices. Whistles and thumps that sounded almost like communication. Were they calling to each other? Planning? The spent casings piled up on the wooden floor. Sweat. Fear. The smell of gunpowder. At one point, something reached through a gap in the cabin's construction. A hand. Or something like a hand. Long fingers. Claws. It grabbed for the axe hanging near the door. One of the miners screamed. Someone fired point blank. The thing withdrew, but not before leaving claw marks gouged deep into the wood frame. Evidence that would still be visible nearly a century later. These men were going to die. That's what they thought. Trapped in this wooden box while things threw boulders and reached through the walls. There was no help coming. No one knew where they were. No one was coming to save them. By the time dawn broke, the siege simply stopped. As if a switch had been flipped. The creatures vanished into the forest. Silence returned. The miners looked at each other in the gray morning light, pale, exhausted, alive. They didn't speak much. They knew what they had to do. They packed what they could carry and they walked out. They abandoned the claim. They never returned to Ape Canyon again. 89 years later, in 2013, a researcher named Mark Mersel would find the cabin's foundation. The square nails were still there, and inside the perimeter, scattered among the rotting wood and stone, were spent rifle cartridges, exactly as Beck had described. If this kind of strange but true content keeps you up at night, do me a favor and hit subscribe. It actually helps more than you think. Here's what's important. They never retracted, not once. Not in the days after, not in the weeks, not in the decades that followed. Local authorities dismissed them. Game wardens said it was impossible. Skeptics offered explanations. Teenagers from a nearby YMCA camp throwing rocks, they said. Mountain lions, they said. Anything but what the miners actually reported. But the miners didn't budge. They didn't embellish. They didn't change their story to make it more sensational or more believable. They just told it, year after year, exactly as it happened. And then in 1967, 43 years of silence later, Fred Beck finally published his account, a book titled, I Fought the Ape-Men of Mount Saint Helens. He was in his 70s by then. He had nothing to gain. No book deals were coming. No fame. He just wanted the truth out there. One last time. The cabin is gone now, the mine is overgrown, but the location exists. It's real. And in 2013, the evidence proved it. The foundation, the nails, the cartridges, everything Beck said happened. It happened at a real place, with real consequences. This is why Ape Canyon matters. This is why it's still talked about 100 years later. Because 5 miners walked into a canyon looking for gold and walked out having encountered something that nobody has ever adequately explained. So what were they? That's the question that's haunted this story for a century. The official explanation at the time was dismissal. Game wardens found no evidence. Skeptics offered mundane answers. Teenagers, animals, mass hysteria. But none of those explanations account for the physical evidence, the claw marks, the spent cartridges, the sheer force required to hurl boulders that size. Modern researchers have offered theories. Some believe they were an undocumented primate species, a large intelligent ape adapted to the Pacific Northwest forests. Others point to Native American traditions that predate Beck's encounter by centuries. The Lummi people spoke of beings they called Sasquatch. The Coast Salish had similar stories. Hairy, bipedal, intelligent, living in the deep forests, avoiding humans. What's undeniable is this. Something happened in Ape Canyon in 1924. Something real enough to make 5 experienced miners abandon a valuable claim and never return. Something real enough that 89 years later, researchers would find physical evidence matching their account. Whether it was a creature, a coordinated animal attack, or something else entirely. That's what we're still trying to figure out. And that's why this case matters. It sits right on the line between folklore and fact, between legend and evidence. This is part 1. 4 more occurrences to come. Each one documented. Each one investigated. Each one leaving us with more questions than answers. If this kind of content keeps you up at night, do me a favor, like and subscribe. And if you want more of this, follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Permanent Underclass and on X at The Underclasser. We post stuff there that doesn't always make it to YouTube. But here's the thing. Ape Canyon is just the beginning. There are 4 more occurrences, 4 more encounters from the Pacific Northwest that have never been adequately explained. Cases with better video evidence, cases with multiple independent witnesses, cases where authorities got involved and then went completely silent. And I mean silent, the kind of silence that makes you wonder what they actually saw. Next, we're going deep into the Olympic Peninsula, trail camera footage that captured something moving through the dense old-growth forest. The footage was analyzed by wildlife experts, federal officials, and then it disappeared. The agency that investigated it stopped answering questions. No explanation, no public statement, just gone. What was on that film? Why did they bury it? Stay subscribed. You're not going to want to miss this.